I'm going to open this up to the Danettes. Do you guys have a sports-related question, injury-wise, for Dr. Adickes here? Because I had the microfracture surgery of my knee, and it didn't work, but I had 6 operations. I eventually got a replacement knee. Are they still doing microfracture surgery where they take the drill and go whip it into your knee?
It's much more rarely done. It is sort of a last-ditch effort in a younger patient to try to get some new cartilage to grow. Just so you know, I in the exact same boat. I had microfracture, a few more surgeries, and I have a total knee too. So the end result.
Yeah,
after microfracture, definitely knee replacement.
My career was never the same after that. Do you guys have? This is free medical advice, so if you want to take Doc up on this, if you got a question here, McLevin, do you have a question for Doc?
I'll start. So I have a hip impingement, Doc. Am I making it worse by running? I jog. Am I making it worse, and will I eventually need a hip replacement because I have a hip impingement on my right hip?
All right. So I am 59 years old. I haven't weighed less than 300 pounds in forever. Both my hips, I have impingement. I mean, I avoid positions that cause me pain, right? Most men have FAI or femoroacetabular impingement, and it does not necessarily mean that you're going to need a joint replacement. Now, I mean, as we age, sometimes we have to change what we do and maybe need to go from running to a bike or running to an elliptical or, change it up a little bit, cross-train a little bit. But no, I wouldn't tell you to necessarily go and have a hip scope to have that impingement removed, because who knows if that will actually make you better. You could end up like Dan here and have 4 more surgeries and then a hip replacement.
Seton O'Connor.
About 4 years ago when the Super Bowl was in Houston, we went and shot a bit where all of us went to a spin class. And it was funny because we were all out of shape, or most of us were out of shape. Okay, I was out of shape. And while we were doing that, when we were done, sometime later that night, my right knee exploded and was like 4 times the size it normally is. And I couldn't walk right for about 2 or 3 weeks. And now every time that I go do something, whether it's running or like play soccer with my kid or something, my knee swells up again. Do you think there's something wrong there?
You were obviously, I think you tried too hard in that spin class. So you were up and out of the saddle and really grinding hard and going after it. Did you win? Out of all the Danettes, were you the winner?
I sure was not.
No, he was not. No.
God.
Do you think he needs surgery? Do you think there's MRI?
Well, all right. So when that happens, it's usually you're grinding some of the cartilage off the ends of your bone. Little pieces of cartilage flake off. The joint gets irritated and swells up. And so now when you're running around playing with the kids, this continues to happen. So, I mean, an MRI would show you whether this was a meniscus tear or more cartilage injury. Very often we have these injections. I call them an oil change. It's hyaluronic acid, and it's like an oil change for the joint. And sometimes that can help protect the cartilage and calm the joint down. But it sounds like you got some wear and tear in there for sure.
Paulie.
Dr. Adickes, I was throwing some weight around last year in the weight room, and like my elbow where the joint is, if I put my arm straight out, it's the top, like the ligament or whatever it is at the top of the joint, and to hold stuff like in your hand, it hurts a lot. And rest, ice, all that stuff didn't help whatsoever. What are your thoughts?
Sounds like tennis elbow. If you stand up and grab a chair and try to pick up a chair by the back of a chair, how's that feel?
Horrendous. Awful.
Okay. Yeah, it's tennis elbow. So the medical term is lateral epicondylitis. Go to your orthopedic surgeon, let them give you a cortisone injection, you'll be cured.
And we'll save the worst for last. Todd?
Yeah, I got a lot of problems. The bottoms of my feet, I went to a podiatrist recently, but I want to hear what you have to say. Right under the toes, I feel like I'm walking on a bump, or like there's a sock stuffed in my shoe, and I'm not sure what's going on. He suggested eventually I may need physical therapy or needles, but what is this bump across right under my toes where it feels like I'm walking on like a little mini pitcher's mound?
Usually that's metatarsalgia. So the better question is, do you feel worse barefoot or do you feel worse with shoes on?
I feel worse with shoes on. And he sold me these, little insoles to put in, and it told me to ice my feet, which it hasn't worked just yet. So I'm trying to figure out, to avoid needles, what I do about that. If
it feels worse with shoes on, then that usually means you have an aroma. So that when the bones are pressed together by a shoe, it's irritating a nerve, and that nerve grows and makes a little, it gets a little swollen. So those neuromas, usually they give you a metatarsal pad, and then so that spreads the toes apart. And sometimes they can do an injection to shrink that nerve. And the worst case scenario, they can do a surgery and actually go in and remove that nerve so it doesn't feel like that anymore.